Party joins us down the line from the United Kingdom. Nigel, good morning. Good afternoon to you.
They're very well, thank you.
Nigel, we have seen the outbreak of Black Lives Matter protests or affiliated protests or protests that claim to speak in the name of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter spreading all around the world. Could you catch us up and catch our audience up a little bit with what we've seen in the United Kingdom over the past 24 hours?
Yes, a big Black Lives Matter march organised in London yesterday, other smaller marches taking place in some British cities. There were about 15,000 people turned up yesterday in London. No social distancing whatsoever. I mean, none. And the irony, they were joined by some Labour MPs, one in particular, a man called Barry Gardiner, quite a prominent member of Jeremy Corbyn's team. They were all screaming blue murder when Dominic Cummings, who of course is Boris Johnson's chief advisor, all screaming blue murder when Dominic Cummings had driven to the north of England. And yet the same people were either on the march yesterday or supporting the march yesterday. Amazing. We've seen Boris Johnson himself repeatedly say Black Lives Matter, almost as an endorsement of the organisation. We even saw London's Metropolitan Police saying that they were there with the marchers in spirit. We even saw, and I can scarcely believe how political correctness has taken hold, we even saw British police officers, taking the knee in sympathy and support of the protesters, who then proceeded to vandalise and deface some of Britain's ancient monuments. They disrespected the cenotaph, which is our national memorial to nearly 1.5 million people killed in 2 world wars. And I myself this morning was driving past Downing Street, and I saw, for example, our Ministry of Defence with BLM graffitied all over it. Now, I'm not saying that there were a lot of people on that march who genuinely would be concerned about inequality. But as we know, all these organisations that purport to stand for these wholesome, wonderful things are so often run by people who seem more motivated by hatred and the spreading of anarchy than anything that the title suggests.
Nigel, you have been a strong supporter, one of the earlier supporters of then candidate Trump and now President Trump. You've met with him in the Oval Office and several times, in other places. You've had conversations with him. Let me ask you this. Your perspective on President Trump's response to this so far, and how did you think the Monday clearing of Lafayette Square and standing outside of St. John's Church with the Bible, how do you think that all played? Was it the right thing to do, and what would be your advice to him right now?
Well, look, I think he's made one little mistake. I think the tweet that said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, I think that was a mistake, and that's given a bit of an open goal to the other side. Apart from that, I think he's been word perfect, and I thought that the speech on Monday was absolutely right. He was respectful of Mr. Floyd's family. He was saying that his death won't be in vain, and then saying that we can't have a country that is effectively lawless. We're going to bring back law and order, and if some of those Democrat mayors and governors think that by being soft on this, it helps their re-election, I'm prepared to do something about it. I thought that speech was very good. I thought it struck the right tone. As for the imagery of walking across Lafayette Square, well, look, the American media, I think, are as out of touch with a huge chunk of public opinion as they were in the election campaign back in 2016, because all the polling I've seen says that people want law and order to be re-established. So, look, overall, he's in the right place, and I think as weeks and months go by, the Democrats will be seen to be very, very weak on violent anarchy.
One of the, I mean, you have, and there's so many topics to cover here with you, because you have actually had many run-ins with the far illiberal, anarchistic left, and otherwise known in a broader sense as Antifa. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with Antifa activists and what Americans should be looking out for? Because you had the acting director for CIS over here, Ken Cuccinelli, coming out yesterday and saying, "Oh, I'm not sure that Antifa has done anything internationally." It's an international organization, isn't it, Mr. Farage?
It's an international organization, and Antifa and many other organizations like it, if you look back through the funding streams, you will see an organization called Open Society is always lurking there somewhere in the background, that of course being Soros money. Raheem, I have for many years been, in a sense, almost plagued by these people almost every single day of my public life. Their main activity was to try and close me down. Their main activity was to try and stop my public events, my public meetings. You know, I've always done the town hall style event. I've done it all my political career. And Antifa and others would stand outside these events wearing face masks at a time when face masks weren't fashionable, but were seen to be intimidating. And they would effectively be hugely abusive to ordinary members of the public who'd come along. Perhaps some were Nigel Farage supporters, perhaps others were open-minded, perhaps some were critics, but they were taking part in the democratic process. So I see them as being fundamentally anti-democratic. I see some of them as being violent, potentially dangerous. And I can tell you, I actually tweeted in 2017 that I thought Antifa should be listed as a terrorist organization. And I'm very pleased that President Trump takes that view too.
Can I drill a little bit more into some of your experiences there? Because I know some things that the audience won't necessarily know. When you were having these public meetings, is it not the case that security on the doors for these meetings would actually have to, when going through people's bags, would find projectiles, would find knives? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, yes. I mean, we had to put in place a huge security operation around me because the threats were very, very real. I mean, for example, we had acid taken off people who were trying to get into my events. We had knives, lots of offensive weapons. And you know, I also had, to live kind of every day surrounded by security just for being out there and making an argument about Britain's membership of the European Union. But of course, that's what the globalists very cleverly did. The globalists tried to link those of us who believe in national democracy somehow with far-right fascism and extremism. The truth is the boot is on the other foot. If anybody are the fascists in this, it is Antifa. It is people who would close down public debate. But I even, Raheem, had, and you will know this, but kind of your listeners won't. I even had these kind of people attack my whole family. I mean, so much so that we had to the children had to run away and hide. They smashed up and wrote off the motor car that I was in. I mean, be in no doubt. As I say, there will be sincere people who will give organizations like this money and support without realizing that deep within them there is this level of aggression, violence, intimidation, and frankly, something bordering almost on hatred.
You mentioned something really interesting there. The globalists were sort of taken aback by some of the old G20 protests and the Occupy protests. It seems during this one that what they're willing to do is actually sell out the concerns and considerations of genuine protesters of all colors, but I'll say specifically black people all across the world who feel like there is an iniquity and a lack of equality in their communities, whether it's policing or any other thing. They're willing to sell those legitimate grievances out to seemingly support, or at least give succor to in some way, some of these Antifa protests, smashing up things, looting things, rioting, the targeting that we've seen of policemen in this country, several being shot and run over across the country in the past couple of days. And now you have General Jim Mattis coming out and attacking the president. Do you see that the globalists, having been attacked by the progressive and liberal left before themselves, are now trying to co-opt this in their favor?
Yes, of course they are. Nationalism to them equates with violence, creates with a new form of 1930s type fascism. That's the narrative they're trying to push. Look, none of us are arguing that what happened to George Floyd can be condoned in any way at all. We do not. But quite, as you say, quite rightly, where is the mourning for the former black police officer in St. Louis who was shot dead trying to protect a shop from being looted? Not a comment about it whatsoever. And what happens is we get the liberal mainstream media get behind these protests and effectively accuse anybody that dares challenge their methods or what they do, effectively accuses them of being in support of racism, violence, and indeed virtually the death of George Floyd. And in the face of that, and given the levels of online abuse that come with it, a lot of people lose their nerve and just don't speak out. I mean, literally, there is hardly a conservative politician in Britain who has dared issue even a murmur of protest that we saw the desecration of public memorials in London yesterday. They're all too frightened to speak. And it just goes to show that this gap, the gap between what people want, what mainstream media and too many career politicians want, hasn't closed since the Brexit votes or the Trump wins of 2016. And it shows you that for those of us that believe in a nation state, for those of us that are proud of our countries, for those of us that really don't trust, European unions, World Health Organizations, United Nations, it shows you that we can never, ever relax our guard for a single moment. We have to keep fighting and we have to keep winning.
Nigel, just finally, very quickly, we've got about 20 seconds left here. Important anniversary, the Dunkirk speech by Sir Winston Churchill, Prime Minister, and obviously the Tiananmen Square, 31 years as well. Any message to Hong Kong and the Chinese Communist Party today?
It is shameful what has happened. Hong Kong was one of the greatest British successes. We handed over a former colony of wealth, aspiration, fairness, and Chinese Communist Party is on the verge of destroying it. It's very, very sad, but it shows you who the real enemy is going on from here.
Nigel Farage, thank you so much for joining us here this morning on War and Pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back.
We will make America great again.